I grew up in a military household, which meant that my family was always moving around. Some might find it interesting because you get to see new places and meet new people. I, on the other hand, despised it. In the year 2013, I was a sophomore in high school in Southern California. I had recently moved to a city called Menifee, which is mainly a suburb for the working folk of Riverside County. This had been the first time my parents were finally able to buy a house of their own instead of living on military bases or renting a home. Being the new kid, especially in high school, I would have thought it'd be harder to make new friends, but I did within the first week. Their names were Bradley, Jacob, and Austin. Bradley still being a very close buddy to this day. They were the main group of friends that I preferred to hang out with when not in school, and I did very frequently. Anyway, there is this one particular day that sticks out from the rest. I remember it being a Friday in that year's fall season. My trio of friends all happened to live on a cul-de-sac which was over a mile away from where I lived. Since my neighborhood consisted of mainly elderly people, I usually spent most of my time over theirs. Frankly, I don't remember what we actually did that day. All I do remember was since it was a Friday, my mum allowed me to stay out later. When the time reached around midnight, my mum texted me and told me to come home as she and my dad were going to sleep. I would have asked my friends if their parents could give me a ride, but on second thoughts, they'd probably be also heading off to bed, and I didn't want to bug by asking if I could sleep over, so I gave my friends a farewell and headed home. I honestly didn't mind walking. The air was nice and cool, and I always loved the night sky. Between mine and my friends' homes, there was an elementary school with a wide green flat park right next to it. The park at the time had no lights surrounding it, and was totally pitch black except on its corners where there were lampposts. As I was about to pass the park, I noticed a man sitting on a bench near one of the park's corners about 100 feet away. When I got closer, and was about to pass him, I gave a quick glance towards him. I couldn't see his face because his head was facing down, but could decipher that he was a bald Caucasian man wearing a black hoodie and shorts. Besides that, I didn't really pay much mind to him, and continued on my way. I kept moving forward, occasionally glancing at my phone for no particular reason, maybe to just pass the time. As I neared a lamppost, I noticed when glancing down that a second shadow had been cast alongside mine. Somebody was behind me, maybe the guy from earlier. I quickened my pace while trying not to make it too obvious to get some distance between myself and whoever was behind me. Now, some people probably wouldn't mind or care if they had to share the sidewalk with a stranger, but since it was late at night, and because I'm a pretty skinny dude, I didn't want to risk being mugged. Eventually, I decided to cross the street. I looked both ways for cars, but obviously it was to see who was behind me. And sure enough, it was the same man. It was a little brighter due to there being more streetlights, and I was able to get another look at him. He was built and over 6 feet tall. After I crossed, I continued down my same route, but shortly after, I noticed that the guy had also crossed the street, and was once again right behind me. Okay, now, I was starting to really freak out as my heart began to beat faster. Up ahead, the street which turned off the road and into my neighborhood was within sight. At first, I felt relieved, but then realized that I didn't want the guy to follow me home and know where I lived. Instead of turning into my street, I continued walking forward until I approached another street coming off the main road. I quickly sped up and turned into the street, and once I knew I was a little out of sight, I began to jog away quickly but quieting my footsteps. When I was like 100 yards away from the mouth of the street, I twisted my head around to clarify if the man had continued following me. He was. And not just following, he was full on sprinting. There was no way I could take him on in a fight, or know if he was armed. At that moment I decided fuck it, and also began to sprint away. I didn't even know where I was at that point, or which new street I'd been running into. All that mattered was getting away. After running away for a while, I ended up thinking of the idea to run to the side of a house that had 2 trash bins next to it, and laying on my stomach behind them. I was flat on my belly and was facing the street. Luckily for me, I had been wearing a black jacket, so I was hoping to be able to blend into the darkness around me. I laid there for a minute when the guy had happened to stop running on the sidewalk near where I was laying. He stood there and scanned the area around him really fast. My heart stopped when he faced my general direction. When he couldn't see me, he cursed under his breath and continued running in the direction he had been previously heading. I waited there for like 5 minutes, so I could be sure that he was long gone. Afterwards, I bolted straight home, but it still took half an hour to get there because I was unfamiliar with these neighborhoods. My biggest fear was bumping into that man again. I never told my parents about that experience, since we had already settled in, and I had already made my own group of friends and didn't want to risk moving again. My only precaution was to never walk home alone at that time again. This happened to me in 2011. I was 16 at the time and completing my last year in school, which is higher secondary. Indian education system is a little different to that in the West. My school worked in shifts. First shift was for science students and second for commerce students. I was a student of second shift. My seat was third bench in front row, shared with my best friend Ira. During first shift, it was used by two guys, Akash and Ansh, both 17. It so happened that once they wrote something bad about girls on a bench which Ira and I noticed, and we wrote something back against them. The next day they left a note on the bottom of the bench, apologizing and introducing themselves. Ira and I found it funny and we replied back. This way we kept exchanging letters every day without seeing each other, talking about stuff but not sharing any contact details. One day, they wrote that they wanted to meet us finally and we should wait for them on school's front gates before the second shift starts. But we refused, since we were not up for anything serious. We also made it clear that there will be no more letters exchanged, and we should stop it now. But the next day, before our class, the guys came to our class giving the excuse that they left something on their table. Meanwhile, of course, to check out me and Ira. That was the first time we saw them as well. After that, there was no conversation between us. Then, one day, when I was entering school, I saw one of my friends, Ayushi, having a chat with Akash. I was puzzled, so I asked her in class. She told me Akash lives near her house and he proposed to her, and now they're in a relationship. I felt strange and felt like telling her that the guy seems weird, but she was in love and I was scared she'll break our friendship. So, after a few days, I get a call from this stranger number. I pick it up and it was Akash. He told me he got my number from Ayushi and just wanted to be friends with me since now he was my friend's boyfriend. I told him fine. We chatted sometimes for a few days, and everything was fine until one day he proposed to me. I made it very clear to him that I'm not interested in him, and now I am no longer up for a chat. He began begging me not to do that. I blocked his number, then he got a new one and started emotionally blackmailing me through messages that he'll kill himself if I don't talk to him. He would make small cuts in his hands and send pictures to me. He told me that we should marry and have babies. I ignored them and blocked his second number, then third, then fourth. I felt like telling my parents, but I was scared that their solution would be taking away my phone, so I never did. After a while, it stopped. We completed school, and all started a new journey to college. In 2013, when I was pursuing graduation, I got a friend request from him on Facebook. I didn't accept, but we had mutual friends, and he could see some of my pics. He made some borderline vulgar comments and I blocked him on Facebook. He again got my number, which I had changed by now, but since we had mutual friends it was easy for him to get. He tried to be someone else, saying he was so-and-so's friend and he saw me in that party and found me gorgeous and all that, but I somehow knew it was him and told him that I am not interested talking to strangers. Again, he tried to emotionally blackmail me, telling me he's standing outside my house and he can do anything to me. I knew he wasn't outside my house since none of my classmates knew where I lived. Also, I was already going through rough times due to my mum's ill health, so I buzzed him off and gave him a last warning, saying that the next time he does anything, I'll go to the police directly. Once again, he stopped harassing me, only to start once again with one more new number after a few days. He began sending me horrific messages telling me he'll get me gang raped by his friends and voice messages telling me how they rape me and enjoy it. I was at college that time and I decided that today I'll tell my mum everything and we'll complain to the police. I was standing near my college room's window and thinking, when I saw Akash roaming on another street. I got scared shitless and I was sure that he knows my college's location and that he was going to stalk me. I had told my college friends about it and we decided to complain about him then and there since my location was just 1 minute away from that area's police station. We got there and told the police everything. They arrested him and then there was a lot of drama with families involved. The police seized his phone and got that I wasn't the only girl he was sending these messages to. There were a few more.
In fact, he sent visually explicit materials as well. Also, he had videos of how to kill without leaving any clue, and tutorials on how to stab with a knife. I was glad I took action before it was too late. His mum cried a lot and apologized on his behalf and requested that we took our complaint back, but my dad refused. My dad was really angry at me for not telling him till now. He's in prison right now. Last year, the local court sentenced him with 7 years of imprisonment. His family's trying to appeal in higher court now. I just hope he never comes out.
So, a friend of me told me this story. I will tell you from her perspective. A little background information. She had planned to go camping with her niece. Her niece lives in the United States while she lives in another country across the ocean. They were both around 15 years old at the time. Here it goes. We went into the forest a few hours ago. It was already starting to get dark, so we decided to find a nice place to set up our tent. We found a nice place, but by the time the tent was up, it was already dark. We decided that it would be better to get into the tent, because there wasn't anything to do outside. We would explore the environment tomorrow. It was just a bit too early to sleep, so we started to talk about random things and stuff. What happened next still terrifies me. Whilst we were talking, 2 boys came into our tent. They were each about 6 years old or something. The strange thing was, this forest didn't have many visitors at all, because there weren't many paths, and we were in the middle of nowhere. Those boys apparently lost their parents and they thought that we were their parents. We became mad on them and they ran out of our tent. When we came out of the tent to see where they went, they were just gone. We didn't find a single trace of them, which was strange because it had just rained a bit and the ground was muddy and we could see our own footsteps very clearly behind us. Nothing else happened on our camping trip and we came home safe, but I will never forget what happened. These events occurred during a year I moved from Belfast in Ireland to a city in the mainland UK for university. In order to pay the bills, I needed a job, and it just so happened that a guy I had worked with back home was in charge of opening a UK branch of a bar chain that started in Ireland in the same city at the exact same time. He sorted me out with a job right away, and I became the de facto supervisor, a manager, when he wasn't around, solely because I was the first employee he hired. Gradually, he hired a handful of Irish students, and the bar, despite the fact that it had no remotely Irish features, became known as an Irish bar. Can't really blame them, as he had an Irish owner, an Irish supervisor/manager, and over half the employees were Irish. Myself and 2 other guys, both English, I'll call them Kevin and Jake, became close and worked the most shifts, getting to know the regulars. There were a few creepy drunken guys or people trying to sneak drugs into the toilets, but nothing worse than what goes on in every bar or club. That was until a certain regular who would usually frequent the place at quiet hours, and seeing the many nukes avoiding chit-chat started to make conversation with the workers. Immediately I understood why he avoided talking to anyone, as he obviously had suffered some severe trauma to his cheek and neck area. He was a slim, unhealthy-looking man in his early 60s with a sunken dent on the right side of his face and a massive scar running from the corner of his mouth to his temple. His voice was also extremely croaky and deep, and I would have to lean over the counter, putting my ear within centimeters of his mouth to even sort of hear him. I would end up just smiling and nodding like an idiot so as to avoid being rude. The only thing I definitely always made out was Belfast, Armagh, another city in Ireland, and Yellow Dog. I felt sorry for him because I assumed he suffered throat cancer or something similar, and always humoured him even though he was nearly impossible to hear. I would normally walk the short distance from work, even though it was through the city centre during the middle of the night. It was nearly always busy as it was a big student town. I only had one weird experience because of this when I was stopped by a tall, nervous-looking guy down the one alleyway I had to walk. He asked me for a cigarette, and when I told him I didn't smoke, he noticed my accent and started walking with me, talking about being from Ireland. I was pretty uncomfortable at this point, as it was like 200 yards until I reached the busy high street where he surely wouldn't try anything, but he kept saying, "My dad is Irish. Give me your number and I'll sort you out." Whatever the hell that meant. He kept telling me to get my phone out so I could take his number. It was obvious to me he just wanted to see if it was worth stealing so he could mug me.
After much insistence that I was okay, he eased off as we neared the high street and said, "I like you. If you ever get in any bother, tell him you're Jameson's cousin." I just mumbled thanks and figured I was lucky to get out of being mugged. When I mentioned this to Jake, he laughed and told me that I definitely was lucky as the Jamesons were the main gang in the city. He told me that they were traditionally Irish travellers, but mostly now English and liked to look after their own. Cool. I was an honorary gang member, I thought, and forgot about it. Months later, we were talking about some of the characters that show up at the bar, and a member of the door staff who was joking around said to me, "I'm surprised you're so friendly with Apara." He explained that the scarred regular was a member of the British Army Parachute, aka Para, regiment and had served in Ireland. I should now explain why I've mentioned Ireland so much thus far. For people that don't know, there has been plenty of death and heartache in Ireland, going back hundreds of years. In 1916, it was split into the bottom 26 counties known as the Republic of Ireland, which is independent, and the top 6 counties became known as Northern Ireland, controlled by the British government. Belfast, where I'm from, is the capital of Northern Ireland and experienced its worst time from 1960s to 1990s, known as the Troubles. Nationalists or Republicans who wanted a full 32-county United Ireland were at war with Unionists, Loyalists, who wanted to remain under British rule. It resulted in plenty of death and wrongdoing on both sides. During the time, the British government sent their army, which only served to escalate tensions, and many atrocities were committed by the British army against the nationalist Republican side. As a result, there is a massive dislike and mistrust of the British army in this part of the island. Also, people who work in an Irish bar would generally consider themselves nationalists. Not always, but it was true for all the members of staff I worked with. Anyway, I brushed off that bit of info, thinking he was a harmless old codger and that I wouldn't let an old prejudice get the better of me. The old guy started coming in more and more, always doing the same thing. Sit at the bar, order 2 bottles, drink one and give the other to whoever served him, then leave after some 90% inaudible chat. I then began to notice he would only ever get a second beer for the English employees. I was being stupid, I told myself. The Troubles were a long time ago, and the majority of people have moved on. But then another Irish employee mentioned it to me. Whatever. Let him hold his prejudice. It was 2013, and I wasn't about to let some old sectarian loser get me annoyed. He still talked to me, and I still smiled politely and nodded. It wasn't until I started thinking back on it that he was always sneering as he talked to me when he mentioned Ireland. He then began to only talk to Kevin or Jake, both of whom were in the pretty boy mould. Short, slim, good-looking guys in their early 20s, who were chatty and good fun. He would start to stay longer and only talked with them. Often he would be clearly looking at me and saying stuff smirking that I couldn't make out. When I would ask them what he said, they would just shrug and say, "How the fuck am I meant to know?" and laugh. What really set off alarm bells in my head was when he began to come in for a drink with guys of similar description and plying them with drinks all night long. Always young men, shorter than him with a slim build. A guy in his 60s buying drinks all night for unassuming young men. I mean, it could be all above board, but it seemed very off to me. My suspicions were confirmed when I was told that while I was back home for midterms, he had been caught by the bouncers supplying the poor young guy who was with him that night with ecstasy, hopefully in exchange for just cash, although something told me otherwise. I figured that was the end of that. He'd be in prison and forgot he even existed until one night I walked home from work at about 3 a.m. and swiped my keycard to get into the grounds of my halls. The gate was electric and took like 5 minutes to slowly close, making it easy for someone without a keycard to sneak in. As I walked a short distance to the actual front door of my halls, I heard quick footsteps and swung around to see the scarred-up, drug-dealing ex-army guy staring right back at me. I was shocked. What the hell am I supposed to do? I was pretty sure I could take him if he came to that, although maybe he would pull some crazy army shit. He just kept staring at me and babbling incoherently. I had no idea what I was supposed to do, and we just stared at each other from a few yards away for what seemed like 20 minutes. Then he began to creep slowly towards me. I wanted to quickly get through the door to my halls, but it was another slow-moving gate so that he could easily just come through. I was mentally preparing myself to have to get physical with this guy, when I desperately remembered my run-in with a gang member. "Listen, mate, I'm the cousin of the Jamesons. Do you want me to get them on the phone?" I blurted out. I was pretty anxious in case he said, "Yes, go ahead and let them come around."
but after a few seconds his face broke out into a familiar, disgusting smirk. The kind that said, "I'm almost certain you're bullshitting me, but I'm not about to risk it." He turned and vaulted the now closed gate with unnerving ease. I didn't see him again for the rest of the year, but found out when I returned in September from the bouncer who caught him with drugs and had been involved with the prosecution that he was now in prison. He was indeed an ex-British Army soldier who had served in South Armor, a particularly bad area during the Troubles for a soldier to be based, with the Yellow Dog Parachute Regiment. He was notorious for preying on young students and supplying them with drugs in return for sex. He also had an intense hatred for Irish people. I'm assuming he had some pretty rough times while serving there, and liked to do the rounds of all the Irish bars, taunting their staff. As a result of this, he became an enemy of the Jamesons for years. The creepiest thing from all this is that, on thinking back, I'm pretty sure that he was saying some pretty racist or xenophobic things to me every chance he got, but I just nodded like an idiot, because I didn't want to be rude. I shudder to think what he was actually saying to Kevin or Jake. So, creepy scarred up ex-army drug-dealing, island-hating sex predator guy. Let's not meet again. But, slightly less creepy, Jameson gang member. I suppose I owe you a beer.